exposing his mistress. I've held this story in for far too long, and I think it's finally time I let it out. Maybe it's for closure, maybe it's for healing, or maybe it's just a way to remind others that sometimes life does find a way to make things right, in its own twisted, poetic fashion. My name is Lydia Caldwell, and I used to live in the quiet lakeside town of Marlow Springs, Vermont. You'd think a place like that would be immune to drama, but as I've learned, betrayal finds its way into even the most peaceful corners of the world. I was married to Lydia Caldwell, a man I met when I was just 20. We were together for nearly 12 years, 11 of them as a couple, one of them as husband and wife. A full decade of history, a shared mortgage, a golden retriever named Clove, and what I thought was an unbreakable bond. I couldn't have been more wrong. It began with the subtle things, as these things often do. The quiet way Damien's demeanor changed when he started working at Larkin Tech, a mid-sized robotics company just on the edge of town. He'd come home later, glued to his phone, laughing at texts he refused to share. When I'd ask, he'd brush it off, just work group chats, nothing serious. And I wanted to believe that. I really did, until the night of the corporate dinner party. It was hosted by Damien's boss at a rented event hall that overlooked Halbier Lake. A beautiful setting, candlelight reflecting off the water, string quartet playing softly in the background. It was supposed to be a relaxing evening, an opportunity to finally meet some of the people Damien talked about so often. Among them was a woman named Elise Mathers. Blonde, charming, a little too charming. I noticed it at dinner. A shared glance between them. Her hand, just barely brushing against his beneath the table. I watched, heart pounding, as fingers intertwined beneath the white linen. A quiet panic set in. I excused myself and went to the bathroom, willing myself not to spiral. But spiraling was inevitable. I confronted him that night, and he didn't deny the connection. He insisted it was nothing, that they were just friends, and that I was overreacting. I gave him a choice: cut all ties with Elise, or we were done. I made it clear that I wouldn't be strung along while he played house with someone else behind my back. He begged, cried, claimed nothing physical had happened, that it was just an emotional lapse. Against my better judgment, I stayed. That was my first mistake. Months passed. Things seemed to stabilize, at least on the surface. Damien stopped mentioning Elise entirely. He came home earlier, made dinner some nights, and even planned a weekend getaway for us. I wanted so badly to believe he'd changed, that we could rebuild. But people rarely change when they think they've gotten away with something. One weekend, I needed to travel to Concord, New Hampshire, to help my cousin after surgery. Damien always came with me on these trips, no matter what. But this time, he said he had a big project deadline and couldn't leave town. I felt a strange unease settle in my stomach. He was nervous, twitchy, over-explaining. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, but my gut refused to be quiet. That night, I opened Snapchat more out of habit than anything. I'd forgotten that he'd once enabled location sharing. And there it was. Damien wasn't at work. He was at the Ashby Tap Room, a small, low-lit bar downtown that he used to go to after work with Elise. My blood ran cold. I didn't call him, not right away. I stared at that glowing little map pin for what felt like hours. The next morning, I asked him how the evening went. He lied, said he worked late, then fell asleep watching a documentary. I nodded, pretending to believe him. But I knew. When I returned home, I confronted him. Not angrily, just truthfully, calmly. And that somehow made it worse, because it gave him room to twist everything. He flipped it on me, said he was the one who couldn't trust me, that I was paranoid and suffocating, that he couldn't be in a relationship with someone who didn't respect his independence. And then came the real blow. He said he was in love with Elise, that they had a connection I could never understand, that I was too serious, too career-driven, too frigid, that I moved around too much for work, which was laughable. I hadn't relocated in 6 years. The relationship imploded right there in the living room. He packed a bag, took Clove without asking, and moved into Elise's apartment by the end of the week. And Marlow Springs being the tiny town it is, word spread fast. I couldn't go to the grocery store without someone giving me a pitying look or whispering behind their cart. Damien and Elise flaunted their relationship without a shred of shame. Public kisses, social media posts, holding hands in the same places we used to go together. And still, he refused to finalize the divorce. For 5 months, I lived in limbo. I'd ask, he'd delay. Claimed he'd get to it, but never did. He knew what he was doing. It was power, control, a final way to keep his grip on me, even from afar. Then came the call that lit everything ablaze. It was from my former mother-in-law, Marianne. I hadn't spoken to her in months. She was the type to stay neutral, but I always knew she disapproved of Elise. She called to give me a heads up, as she put it. Apparently, Damien and Elise were moving to Oregon in a week. With no legal divorce in place, that meant interstate proceedings and a mountain of paperwork and legal fees. I was stunned, furious, betrayed all over again. But this time, I acted fast. I contacted a lawyer the next day and filed for divorce. We expedited the process, and I had the paperwork ready by the weekend. Damien had the gall to act surprised when I showed up to serve him personally. He asked why I was being so dramatic. Said I should be civil about it. Civility went out the window the night he made a mockery of our marriage under a dinner table. 2 days after the papers were signed, they left Vermont. And I thought that was the end. But karma has a funny way of writing the final chapter. 3 months later, I got a call from an old coworker, someone who still kept up with the local news. She asked me if I'd seen the story about Elise. I hadn't. She sent me the link. Local woman arrested in embezzlement scheme involving nearly $85,000 from regional robotics firm. It was Elise. Turns out, for over a year, she had been siphoning funds from her employer, Larkin Tech, the very same company where she and Damien had worked. It had been a slow trickle at first. Small reimbursements forged, conference trip invoices altered. But as their lifestyle became flashier, expensive wine, new furniture, sudden vacations, the amounts increased. It all unraveled when the company underwent an audit. Elise was arrested at her home in Eugene, Oregon. Spent a month in county jail before her trial. She was found guilty. A felony conviction. Now has a permanent record and over $60,000 in restitution to pay back. And the cherry on top? She lost her job and her professional license. Damien, from what I've heard, is still with her. Still trying to hold up the facade of their great love story while living with a convicted felon and watching the walls close in. There's no satisfaction quite like watching the person who ruined your life get hit by the wrecking ball they built with their own hands. But I don't think about them much anymore. My life has moved on in quiet, beautiful ways. I sold the house, moved to a different town, Ridgeport, Maine, and finally adopted a second dog to keep Clove company. I changed jobs, started hiking again, and began painting in the evenings. Things I hadn't done in years. Things Damien never had patience for. Sometimes, people tell me I was strong for how I handled it, that they don't know how I didn't lose my mind. But here's the truth, I did lose it. For a while. But you rebuild. You shed the parts of yourself that loved someone who couldn't love you back, and you grow something new in the ashes. Elise and Damien will always have each other. And maybe that's punishment enough. Because now, every dinner party they attend will be colored by whispered rumors. Every job interview Elise goes to will end with a background check. Every time they try to start fresh, the past will follow them like a shadow. Me? I sleep peacefully. Alone, but at peace. And if you're still reading, maybe you're going through something similar. Maybe someone is holding your heart hostage while pretending it's your fault. If so, I promise you, there is a day when the truth catches up. And sometimes it wears handcuffs.
They both seem like a disaster, but serving divorce papers and then celebrating her arrest feels calculated.
Karma really came through. You handled it with strength and grace. Watching them fall apart without lifting a finger is the best ending.
This situation is painful, but I'm glad you found a way out. Their downfall is intense, but I hope it doesn't distract from your own healing and growth.